and get started. All right, so this is our first session of the Module 1 of the AEOP, Army Education Outreach Program, is AEOP, and the project that we're working on is Research Experiences for STEM Educators and Teachers, and that acronym is RESET. So this is our 2017 cohort, and we are doing a 45-minute session, which will offer kind of 3 levels of conversation. One is kind of an overview of the whole project, and the second is to look forward at what will be happening during Module 1, and then a quick peek at what happens during Module 2 in August, and then addressing how we're going to do the online work together for about 30 hours worth of time and effort during Module 1. And then we reset the time clock and we do another 30 hours during Module 2. So that's for Level 1 participation. And then we'll talk briefly about the folks who are going to be going on Level 2. So what I'm going to do is ask you to introduce yourself. We did a quick round of this via roll call on the Thursday night session. So how about you just go ahead and do a quick introduction of yourself.
All right, Mike Saloy. I teach at Toledo Technology Academy in Toledo, Ohio. I teach chemistry for juniors and then 8th grade pre-engineering technology, in which we do VEX robotics and CAD. Okay, fantastic. And so you go by Mike?
Yes. All right, excellent. So Mike, what I'd like you to do is kind of put me on a 10-minute timestamp, and I'll pause every 10 minutes and we'll take a little bit of Q&A with you, because as I get going on the PowerPoint and as I start kind of sharing information, I often lose track of time. So it'll help me if you play timekeeper.
All right.
All right, so what I'm going to do is go into a screen sharing mode where I pull up a PowerPoint and we'll put it into presentation mode. So this is the introductory PowerPoint, and it is way longer than 45 minutes. It's probably going to be about, I think it's a total of about 80-something slides. So we'll get through a portion of it tonight, and then we're going to use this as kind of like an anchoring PowerPoint throughout our work together. So there's lots of information in here that is too much to absorb in one setting, but we'll get started with it, and then we'll refer back to it throughout our time together. So the Army Education Outreach Program, Research Experiences for STEM Educators and Teachers, is being managed by myself, Dr. Sally Pardue, at Tennessee Tech University. I am the director of a research and outreach center referred to as the Oakley STEM Center, and we provide professional development as well as direct interaction with the public, as well as working with faculty on campus doing research around how people learn STEM subjects, both integrated and individual letters within STEM. My background is mechanical engineering. I teach at the university in the mechanical engineering department, but I'm pretty much full-time director now, so it's I only teach every once in a while. But that's I love the E. That's my integrated thinking, is that math and science and engineering and the technology that we have access to in modern day America is a fascinating play space for students to learn and become aware of careers that they can take on when they move out into the adult world. So the overall purpose of RESET is to provide authentic examples and experiences that can be used to foster STEM career awareness and exploration through classroom level projects that engage students really around that idea of how to research. And so we do that together in a cohort approach. We have about 20, sometimes 22 teachers in a cohort that we work together online as Level 1. And we work Module 1 in May and Module 2 in August. And a subset of the full cohort go on ground to do research in an Army research laboratory, working directly one-to-one with a mentor who is employed by the Army conducting science and engineering type research. So by taking the collaborative approach, we're able to take those 6 or 8 teachers who are able to do on-ground work and immediately leverage what they are doing with the other 20 or the other 14 to 16 who are in the online cohort. So this how happens through lots of work towards developing a cohort mentality online, and then it really gels when the teams of teachers are working together to create a lesson and or unit plan of instruction that they could each individually use in their classroom and share across the cohort, and future to share with the public at large. And then we're going to be talking about what that lesson and unit plan structure is going to look like. So we're doing Module 1, Introduction to Research, and I've titled this Learning Through the Legacy Cycle, because I'm going to introduce us to a framework that I find incredibly useful as an engineer. And it makes sense to me. It's always the way that I've learned. And so we're going to talk briefly about what is the legacy cycle and how will we create lesson plans that kind of live on that framework. So the legacy cycle is grounded in research that was published in a text called How People Learn. And that is a book that is freely accessible to anyone online. You can download the full 300+ page book from the National Academies Press, NAP, National Academies Press. You can look up the text, How People Learn. And that was a publication that came out in 1999, 2000. So it's not been quite 20 years, but it was based on the best of what was being reported in terms of cognitive, so basically from the neuroscience fields, as well as psychology, as well as education, looking at the real essence of what has to take place for deep and long-lasting learning to occur. And out of that work came the legacy cycle as one methodology that could be used in classroom settings. And so the legacy cycle is something that I've been using throughout our work here in the Upper Cumberland, working with hundreds of teachers over multiple projects, developing this type of methodology to share in terms of instruction. And we've done it all the way from 3rd grade out to college classrooms. So it's a proven technology, and we think it's one that we'd like for you to try as well. So the legacy cycle starts with a big question and or a scenario that engages the learner and requires them to look at their current knowledge and any preconceptions they might have. And that's facilitated by the instructor through a process called Generate Ideas. This is an activity that would cause learners, and it could be more than one activity, that causes learners to display and compile their current knowledge, ideas, and perceptions. And therefore, the instructor can interact with the learner while they are publicly declaring what their current ideas are. Then you go into a stage called multiple perspectives, and this is a place where other resources, and if Generate Ideas is the knowledge that's already in our head, what we're doing with multiple perspectives is going out and finding out what's in other people's heads. So these are the classic, go to the library and find some literature. Go online and find a couple of journal articles. Find some videos that pertain to the information. And depending on the age of the learner, this might be a very guided activity by the instructor, very scaffolded, where you've already preceded the space with the things that you want them to find. Or it could be a very open-ended process. And this is differentiated from the very hands-on active process of research and revise, which is a set of activities that a learner engages in to help revise and add to and modify and build from their original ideas based on new information. And that new information could be things that they're learning through the multiple perspectives. It could be new information that they're gaining through direct interaction with the phenomenon, such as, designing a set of experiments and conducting them, taking data, analyzing the data, etc. It could be new information that an engineering process is learning by examining prototypes and finding out how they're performing and revising the prototypes. And so this is a very iterative process between research and revise and multiple perspectives, because we often bounce back and forth between the two. And further, this legacy cycle way of learning moves into a mode that is also iterative. At the bottom of the cycle, you can see those back and forth arrows in the little graphic. Test Your Mettle is a place where we constantly are asking learners to both learn how to self-assess, conduct their own formative self-assessments, and or if we're working with younger students, we as instructors are providing an opportunity for us to interact with them and looking at their formative knowledge space, what's happening as they're moving through research and revise and sharing their ideas with each other. And finally, what kind of distinguishes this learning cycle from others that you may be familiar with is this stage that's of equal importance to the other 5, and it's called the Go Public. And that is learning doesn't conclude until we actually commit to sharing what we've learned with others. So it's a public venue and we can get really creative in what that means. And so we'll explore some of the different ways that people have encouraged students to go public. And we'll see as adult learners how we can go public. So again, we've used in the Upper Cumberland, part of Tennessee. I work with 16 rural school districts across about 7,500 square miles, 55,000 K-12 students. And we've been using the legacy cycle for multiple years, helping teachers and students learn together. And so we have some published legacy cycles that we can share with you, and I'll be doing that more in Module 2. But I wanted you as participants to experience the legacy cycle firsthand. So rather than present all of our work as me telling, as basically one multiple perspective kind of from day one, I'm really asking us to learn together as a cohort. And the challenge I'm posing us is, in order to teach students about how research is conducted in science and engineering, what do I need to know about how to research? So think about that question for a moment. Ask yourself, is this a question that's engaging you, the learner, and requiring you to look at your current knowledge and your preconceptions? What do you think, Mike?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so going one step further, now, and this works incredibly well when you're in a group, a large group. You and I can play with this a little bit, even one-to-one conversation. Let's go through a stage of generating ideas. So we'll actually be exercising this live online Thursday night. We'll be circling back around and trying this with some of our peer cohorts members. But tonight, what I'd like for you to do right now is take a sheet of paper and commit for 60 seconds to don't talk to me, don't get distracted, but write down your immediate response to that question. And I'm going to pose it to you again. I'll put it up on the screen. So I want you to write down your surface thoughts. What comes to mind immediately? You may have additional questions. You may have thoughts. But just start writing. Do a free write for 60 seconds. I'm singing the Jeopardy song in my mind. I could do the ABC song too. That one works. Okay, so I want you to, you're going to hang on to that data. We're not really going to talk about it right now, but we will try it on Thursday night, because one of the aspects of this Zoom interface is I can put us into breakout rooms. So let's say we have 20 people online and I want to have 5 breakout rooms, 4 to a room. I can set up 5 spaces and send you into group talk, and then give you a couple of minutes. You know, that would be the pairing up. You've done the thinking part. Now you're going to pair up and share within the group. And then I'd call you back together and ask for one spokesperson from the room to speak on behalf, you know, just to share 1 or 2 thoughts. And we would generate then, as a cohort or as a classroom of learners, we would generate a lot of ideas that could go up onto a whiteboard, and we could start sorting out, what do we collectively in the room already know? What kind of questions do we think we might need to address? That sort of thing. So you can kind of get a feel for how this could work both in the classroom and even online. We'll be practicing this technique. So this would be where we could consolidate our Think, Pair, Share results and leave a footprint for ourselves later on. And we'll do that Thursday night. One of the things that, then this is probably a break point. Have you been checking your time for me? Are we at about 10 minutes in?
Actually, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, exactly.
So up to this point, Mike, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay, great. Good, good, good. So often what can happen as we start to dig into a challenge, question, or scenario, someone in the room might bring up a related question. And I'm going to anticipate that sometimes before we get into the how do we do something, maybe we ought to first consider the why we're doing something. And so you can probably think in your own mind how students in the classroom would start to maybe, well, why do we even need to address whatever the challenge is? And that would set up a whole opportunity for discourse around relevance or importance of the question that's been posed. So this would be a chance for us to explore the why. Why do we research? If I'm going to worry about teaching people how to research, or if I need to learn how to research and I want to turn around and teach others, there's actually a couple of why questions. Why do I want to teach others? Why do people research in general? So that's what I want you to anticipate, is that often during the generate ideas phase, you'll open up additional questions. And this allows me to kind of briefly have a look forward. We're going to be exploring a couple of different references throughout our work together. And one that I'm going to share with you is offers that here's some background as to why we do research. I'm going to ask you as a learner with me in the cohort to approach this question first based on your own knowledge. But here's what one person shares with us, is that we often do research just to simply discover something new. We might call that open-ended exploration. Or maybe once we've discovered that something new, we might go into documenting that phenomenon in greater detail. So you could imagine going into a very descriptive phase where you have to explore multiple instances of whatever phenomenon it is and learn what's influencing it, describing it in great analytical terms, both from science and a mathematical and engineering technology perspective. And that gets us into then explaining. Once we've observed a variety of phenomenon, perhaps we want to then develop the dynamics of that phenomenon, figure out how it can be manipulated, which is the core interest of most engineers. We want to use it to a benefit, and how might that happen? So we would go into an explanation mode. These are all different purposes, but they're all subject to the same principles of the processes and the ways that we do research. So we're going to explore that topic a little bit more. And this is where, circling back around, we would want to remind ourselves as participants, as adult learners, why are we doing this reset program? So I wanted to put the primary purpose up in front of you again. It's often so that we can both inspire our students, but also urge and kind of drive them towards some self-discovery about what are they most interested in. Help them discover their passion so they can start thinking about what careers might be open to them. And of course, we're focusing towards STEM careers at this point, and that's really what motivated the Army to sponsor this research, or this professional development design with you as cohort members. Let's take a little time out and ask ourselves, as we are thinking about how to teach people how to research and why we want to teach people how to research, I want you to consider these two ways of looking at that process. If you were taking a deductive approach to the world, you might say that learning a generalized process of research is what will help students learn how scientists and engineers actually do the research. So you'll start generalized and you'll become more specific, looking at outcomes of those scientists and engineers. On the other hand, if you were taking an inductive approach to the world, you would say that first learning specific examples of that research that scientists and engineers actually do will then help students kind of learn by discovery how to do research in general. So we're often going to find that we as teachers, we as instructors, are probably sometimes both taking a deductive and inductive approach when we teach others. But we probably also have an inherent philosophy that we lean towards. And so as we discuss throughout our time together, I want you to kind of keep this in mind. And to help you do that, I posed a little humor. So penguins are black and white. Some old TV shows are black and white. Therefore, some penguins are old TV shows. Now, would you say that's good logic or flawed logic?
A little flawed.
Yeah. And then we find out and that's the humor at the bottom, logic is another thing that penguins aren't very good at. But I invite us to take this cartoon and pose it in a different way. So the scientific method, I should have bolded it, the scientific method is how research is done. Every fifth grader knows this, but they might not really enjoy knowing it, but they do know it. Scientists and engineers find out cool stuff and make cool stuff by doing research. So we often, show the outcomes in the classroom. We often, try to instigate some interest in a different career or alternate careers that a child might not have considered by sharing exciting examples to promote that interest in careers. We'll bring people into the classroom and they'll do their cool show and tell, and everybody wants to be an astronaut or something like that. So then, would we be too surprised to find out that some students might be walking around with the idea that all scientists and engineers do research, but because we know all research is done using the scientific method, that means all scientists and engineers do the research using the scientific method, and now maybe they're not so interested in that career because they have a very narrow definition of what the scientific method is. So I want you to kind of chew on that. We'll circle back around. I had never put it together like this before, but I really think that this is what's walking around in a lot of kids' heads. And I say that because it was what I was thinking when I was in ninth grade, trying to figure out, do I want to be a scientist or do I want to be an engineer? What do engineers do? What do scientists do?
It's one of the things that I try to break in my students because they think that the scientific method is the way science works, but that's how it's reported, but it's a lot messier.
It is very messy, and yet, that's a preconception that they're walking around with. So you're right. Maybe you'll be able to share some of your success strategies. Well, not even maybe, hopefully, you'll share some of your strategies with the rest of us. So we're going to be playing with this quite a lot. So going back to the challenge, in order to teach students about how research is conducted in science and engineering, what do I need to know about how to research? That's what gets us into why we've designed Reset the way we have. So some of the multiple perspectives that we could explore. This is a text. It's quite affordable, actually, as a hardback. I bought it about 10 years ago. But it's a really helpful book to have a better grasp on what's going on in the research and development. That's what R&D stands for. So research and development methods for both science and engineering. Peter Bach is writing from a wealth of experience working in government and industry, working with industry laboratory processes. So it's a really interesting read. It's kind of dense. It's a little bit more than what I would probably want to put in the hands of a typical high school student, but it's one worth maybe adding to your bookshelf for Christmas or something. But I'll be sharing some excerpts with you from Peter Bach's perspective. And in fact, Peter kind of discusses this idea of the scientific method, but he offers that science and the engineering and the research and development enterprise can be considered, when I learned the scientific method, there were 7 steps, right? And it just seemed like everybody knew what those were. Some people memorized 10, some people less. But what Bach offers us is that the doing of science and engineering actually does have some phases, and he simplifies them down into 4. And he says they're sequential. So analysis, hypothesis, synthesis, and validation. And I like that hypothesis doesn't land at the top, because in order to make a hypothesis about something, you have to have probably first analyzed it or observed it and analyzed it. Synthesizing and validating, the book goes into a lot of explanation of why these 4 phases. But he immediately goes on to say, yeah, they may be sequential phases, but you're going to apply them to a task iteratively and recursively to achieve the objective. So in many ways, it kind of reminds me of the legacy cycle. Now, he doesn't refer to the legacy cycle methodology of learning or doing research to learn, but in many ways, I find some similarities. And so I'll be sharing some excerpts as we go along, some more things that Bach shares. There's another text that I became aware of when I was moving out of the engineering classroom and into the world of, well, really, how does education happen? Rather than just assuming that I can pour knowledge into a student's head, what really needs to happen, and therefore, who are the people who research how education works? I started going to some workshops, and one workshop I attended presented me with this book, and it's also free, available from the National Academies Press. You can look up Scientific Research and Education from the National Academies Press, and you can download the full book. But the steps that it offers in terms of thinking about scientific research in education actually seems to work quite well for me as engineering research or even just pure science research. So you start with a process of questioning. You have to create a research question. If you're going to ask for money from somebody to fund your research, you're going to have to say, here's my researchable question. And it needs to be significant, and it needs to be able to be investigated empirically. And you're going to be able to call out theory that links the research that you're proposing to do. What relevant theory does it reinforce in terms of adding to, or maybe even countering existing theory? What methodologies are you going to take on that allow you to directly investigate that question? What reasoning, what logic are you going to have to provide in order to build for the reader a coherent, explicit chain of from point A to point B to point C? Will you be designing something that is replicable and generalizable across multiple studies, and or even better, across fields? And are you planning on disclosing, and of course you are, disclosing your research to encourage professional scrutiny and critique? And so we'll play with some of those definitions as well and keep bringing them back in multiple perspectives. How are we doing on time?
I just sent you a message.
Okay, perfect. The one thing I haven't quite figured out how to do, Mike, is monitor the chat window,
Okay,
and pay attention to time. So I think what I'll have to add is somebody else who's watching the chat window and is able to interrupt and interject on behalf of the chat. All right, so this is a good place to take a break. How about you ask me any questions coming up between what we've talked about in the multiple perspectives?
No questions so far. I've actually read through the PowerPoint already, and I'm in a good place. This is all good stuff.
All right, fantastic. Right, so this is where we're going to move into for the next 3 weeks, now 2.5 weeks, where we're going to really kind of dig in as adult learners into understanding more about how are we going to help others learn how to research. And so we're going to do this with some hands-on experiential learning ourselves, even though we're in virtual space, and I can't reach out and touch you quite yet, but at some point, you know, we're going to have some ability as a cohort to break out into smaller groups and have very discussion-oriented approaches to learning. So let's do something already. If I'm going to teach someone how to research, don't I first need to do some research? And if I'm going to do research, maybe I should have a research question. So maybe one of the things I need to know how to do is to develop a research question. So that'll be one of our first tasks that we take on as individuals and that we help reinforce each other as peers. At this point, you know, if I wanted to say to you, the adult learner, what I hope you get out of this exercise that we go over the next week or two is for a process of going through defining and creating a good research question. So, what are the attributes of a good research question? And here's another opportunity for us to learn how to use some of the tools online. So one of the things that we'll do on Thursday night is break out and discuss it with each other, what we think are the attributes of a good research question. And further, I'll probably invite you to be learning how to use the online community tool. And we'll have discussions that I'll pose and or you can pose as participants, and the rest of us respond to. So another form of think, pair, share, carried out what I call asynchronously. So if we're in a room together, think, pair, share is live talk. If we're not in a room together and we're relying on a discussion board, we're going to have to develop some understanding of what that looks like. And we're not doing it at the same time, so we're doing it through handoff of dialogue. It'll get messy, but we're going to try it. That'll be one of our assignments in week 2. All right, as I said, often what will happen as you're going through the process of doing something, you're going to think, hey, I need a little bit of input from somebody else who might have done it before. So it's an opportunity to look at multiple perspectives again, and this is really the book that opened up my thinking. a lot. So I wanted to share it with you. It's one of my favorites. I put it in the hands of every undergraduate student who walks through my door and says, Dr. Pardue, I want to do some research. I'm like, great, we're going to read this book together. And graduate students, teachers, anybody who yeah, literally, my kids graduating from high school, probably I should give it to them while they're in high school. It would be a book that would be difficult to maybe expect most high school students to grab a hold of and use, but I'm sure some of you, as you read through the book yourself, will think, oh yeah, I want to put this in the hands of some of my students who really kind of like to think at this level. So the Craft of Research, you're actually going to be receiving the 4th edition, but I've sent you the PDF of the 3rd edition, so you can go ahead and start reading. It's my go-to resource now. And one of the things that I really love about it is it's both theoretically grounded, but it's incredibly practical. One of the chapters is how do you take an interest in a topic to a researchable question? And you're actually going to be taking this on yourself as part of your research journaling process. I'm going to do some pre-assigned topics based on what the mentors are sharing with me that this summer that the 6 to 8 teachers who are going to be level 2 are going to do maybe once they get on ground with their mentors. We're going to take some of those topics and you're going to kind of peel it back a little bit and figure out something that really fascinates you about that topic. And then you're going to take the time and effort to figure out how do you go from topic to question. And Booth and the Craft of Research is an excellent guidebook to help you go through that process. And then we're going to group learn with one another. So you'll be individually journaling, but we're going to do some tiny test your mettle opportunities where you're sharing your question with your local team. So instead of trying to share with 20, we're probably going to go ahead and do some teaming up. And we're going to look at that question that you're developing through 4 different lenses of clarity, significance, evidence, and technique. And this is a process that I experienced again myself as an engineering faculty wanting to learn how to do engineering education research. And it's from a source, and I need to find the original source. I just have the authors' names right now. But we'll go through those loops. So we'll look at clarity. We'll look at, for example, here's a quick start example. Instead of asking what color is the sky, we can ask ourselves, is that a question that is, remember those purposes of research? Mike, how would you classify that question? Is it exploring? Is it describing? Is it?
It is just describing, I believe.
Yeah, it's describing. So there's nothing wrong with a what question, a describing question, but we often find that what questions tend to limit the overall scope. And they do require observation, analysis, and assessment skills, but they may not be as large a question that would guide you into some deeper learning. So think of us as instructors. How do we help a student move from the what question to more of the why or the how question? And by asking that question, does the student open up their thinking space? And so we'll, that can be got at kind of through this clarity discussion, sometimes with a student, because we'll start peeling back the layers. And so a research and revise process for us is to put a question together and then start getting feedback from others. And we can look for specific language. We can ask ourselves, is it too vague? Your neighbors can offer feedback to you. And we'll actually play with this example. If all goes well Thursday night on my timing, we'll actually be peeling this one apart a little bit. So I actually did this question with some teachers in a Research Experiences for Teachers, RET program sponsored by National Science Foundation. And one of the teachers came up with this question after hearing some general research topics. They said, will ultrasonics, NDT, help identify pore fusion and foam patterns? And I don't want to peel this one apart with you tonight, but we're going to play with that on Thursday night. And we're going to see about trying to examine it for significance. And we're going to ask ourselves, who's really going to care about the answer to the question? Who's your audience? Is it within a certain disciplinary community, or might it also be other communities? So we'll look at relevance and justification and context and how edgy is it. And one of the ways to do that, offered by the craft of research text is to take your question in whatever state that it's in and turn it around. So instead of posing it as a question, turn it around into a sentence. And that sentence would be, I'm studying and researching X in order to learn more about Y to better inform Z. So if you put it into this XYZ format and then turn it back into a question, you're going to find that you'll probably end up with a much tighter question because it's going to force you to think about your question differently. So this I actually kind of give I didn't walk us through the process, but I actually show you the outcome over not much more than 5 hours of effort, some back and forth between the teacher and their peers. They were able to take that beginning question at the end of day 1 and turn it into, by the end of day 2, a much more refined question. And so we'll talk about some more examples like that.
All right, it's about 10 minutes.
All right, perfect. Do you have any questions?
Not yet.
All right. So we're doing things together, and the doing that we're doing is figuring out how to write a good research question as the jump-off point. And so now it's a time for us to get ready to go public eventually. So we're going to test our mettle with one another. And so one of the pieces that I'll be asking you to do in your journal and then share out with us periodically is to kind of create a poster. So create a white space where you've posed your question and then you walk the wall and you look at other people's questions. And so you can imagine if I'm in a room live with some students, I could have white boards or I could have white paper up on the wall and we could provide live feedback for one another. We're going to, because we're using this as an online process, you can see where we might use a discussion board. So we're going to post our question and teams and then get feedback from your other teammates. So we'll do a walk the wall virtually. And we'll be looking at clarity and significance as we do that. And that will force us to go back into, after we get some feedback, we'll go back to research and revise. And now we have to start thinking about all of the things that go into answering that researchable question. So we'll have to start examining theory and measurement. We'll have to think about the methods. And notice I've grayed out the scientific research because I really think that this approach that one text offers, the one that you can download from National Academies Press, really it works. And that is a really, I'll tell you right up front, that's a very dense publication. It takes me time and effort to read that book, but it's well worth it. One of the processes, and this is a workshop that I attended, to go from theory to measurement. You go through this operationalization stage, which every time you're telling your story or talking to people, you're having to redefine what you mean by things. And so you can think as a teacher, if I'm listening to students struggle through this by publicly examining their poster, there's all sorts of opportunities for me to formatively provide some assessment of both the learning that's happening and how the students are developing. So going back to that looping process, we've looked at clarity and significance. We'll also begin to look at evidence that we need to create. And of course, that's what leads us straight into the measurements process. So an empirical investigation asks us to look at what evidence that we need to answer the question. What will make us believe our own claim? What will we need to convince a colleague? And so this is a great place to be reading The Craft of Research again, because the whole book is built on the premise that you are going to publicly tell your story. And therefore, you're going to have to think about your logic from day one and your evidence. So what would be sufficient? What would be unsatisfactory? What might be contradictory? And we'll explore this together. So there we are at the bottom half of the legacy cycle, bouncing around between research and revise, test your mettle, multiple perspectives. And at some point, we're going to ask ourselves, especially those 6 of you who are going to go on ground and do research with a mentor, how cool would it be if you could walk in the door on day 1 and say, well, I've got a research plan. And of course, plans change, but that's part of learning how to research. But it's much better to show up with a plan than to not have anything to start with. So we're going to try to get you jump-started by working together as a cohort. So we'll do that by having this kind of living poster based on the feedback and discussion about evidence, kinds of measurements, we'll be thinking about getting another feedback loop from our peers. So we might walk the wall again. And then eventually we'll be looking at the actual techniques, because I might say I need to be able to do a measurement specifically following a methodology, but do I know the technique of doing that process? So this gets us into looking at the overall costs. You may have a question that would take 4 years to answer, not 4 weeks. So we really have to kind of think about the time and effort, and that becomes part of crafting research. So multiple perspectives. We've looked at the scientific method offering from Bach, a 4 sequential phases technique. And at some point, we're going to go public. So at the end of Module 1, our goal will be to have a research plan. We'll certainly have a research question. And whether or not it's the question that you actually get to examine when you go on ground and do research, that remains to be seen. So this is where we would be ending Module 1. And we'll be designing our online, on your own exercises to help reach this point. Any questions?
Where do we record our journals for On Your Own?
So the On Your Owns, I'm offering to you that you can create your own Word document and just share it with me once a week as kind of like a print PDF of whatever your current journal status is. Or you could create a Google Doc and share it with me. So you could have a living document that's going to keep changing.
All right.
I could go in and look at it at any given time and have dialogue with you about what you're writing. So your choice. The remainder of the slides are having us kind of go through a look at a little bit, again, what goes on with level 2 research and what is an example of someone who did this. This is Lindsay Dahl. And so this is where I wanted you to read through on your own and kind of see what an example of a legacy cycle that came out of 3 teachers working together. So Lindsay went on ground and did research, but she was working with Missy and Melody to create a legacy cycle. All right. Any other questions, Mike?
Not for this, no.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share, and I think we're right at 45 minutes, which is pretty good. I'm actually going to stop the recording at this point because I think I may be limited to a 45-minute